So hello there, and thanks for joining us today for this session where we're focusing on getting your self-build budget right at the start of your project and avoiding those hidden annoying costs. My name is Jo Mulgrew and I'm the Operations Director here at Cost My Self Build, and I'm really pleased to introduce my colleague Adrian Wild, our Managing Director. Hi,
Thanks
Adrian.
for inviting me, Jo.
Hi, sorry, just talking slightly over you there. Adrian has also been the proprietor of a successful building company for over 20 years, and he built many hundreds of houses and over 80 new homes before setting up the HBXL group. So he's well versed in the power of an accurate estimate to start your project and avoid the hidden costs that crop up. So a quick note on Cost My Self Build. So Cost My Self Build is an estimating service. It's designed to give you the power in your project by providing you with an accurate build cost and projection for your project. We use only very experienced professional estimators that often have a background in construction. We use the latest materials prices and current labour rates, as there's a hell of a lot of cost inflation right now. Projects are carefully evaluated with nothing overlooked, and we take the time to get your project budget right. It gives self-builders a reality check, detailed costs, so that when you come to search for your builder or look for funding, you've got the right information in your hands. And we've completed over 2,500 estimates since our inception. Now, we could spend all of the next 15 minutes on the importance of an accurate build cost estimate in the first place. However, today we're focusing in on the often forgotten costs, the hidden costs that could make your project prohibitive or provide you with a nasty surprise part way through. So Adrian's the man with the advice, so we'll crack on and he'll start. So Adrian, what's your first tip for us today?
Well, clearly, as providers of estimating software and estimating services, we would always say, get a detailed estimate. It's the absolute foundation of any project. You really need to understand what it's going to cost you to build the project based on realistic factors. So, however you do it, make sure before you finally commit to your land and your build project that you get a detailed estimate based on the specification that you want to deliver to you and your family. Okay, so on the note of price inflation, significant costs increases at the moment. We've seen timber going up 50%, cost of steels, cost of PVCU, everything rising. So really important that you get your the build cost correct for construction. But now let's start talking about the hidden costs. So our first hidden cost, it shouldn't really be so hidden, but it can mount up quite quickly. The design costs, Adrian, we've talked about this quite a lot before and how they can mount up. What's your thoughts on design costs? Yeah, well, there's a whole range of prices you can invest in the design. Clearly, an architect will be promoting the idea that you need to spend a lot of money on the design, and they will provide you with creative ideas from the outset. So that's very useful. An architect can charge you up to, I believe, 15% for an overall total service project. So, if you're building a property that's worth 200,000 or 300,000, you can see that you can run up a very large bill with them, which may well be worthwhile for a sophisticated high-end project. If, on the other hand, you're doing something that's fairly, shall we say, bread and butter basic, you may be able to go with your requirements to an architectural technician who, with relatively little effort, will be able to interpret your design and provide you with a detailed drawing. These guys are likely to charge a lot less, anything from a couple of £1,000 to £5,000 for a design. So, very big differences in services and costs in that area. Okay, so we often hear about location, and when you watch any of the kind of home programs or self-build programs, and obviously that has a big impact on the cost of a site or a home.
However, when you're self-building, you've obviously got to be thinking about location from the perspective of what's in the ground, what am I building on? So perhaps you could give us a little bit of background on your thoughts on the site appraisal and why that is so important.
Yeah, well, you obviously need to, do a detailed measure of the site to make sure, your desired house will physically fit on the site, and the site plans you're provided with are accurate. But you then also need to start looking at the actual ground itself. Why is this particular site available? What are the ground conditions? Are you building on clay or sand or rock? All of these will have a different impact on the outcome. Clay soil, for argument's sake, which occurs very regularly in the southeast, is often what is known as shrinkable clay. And if you have shrinkable clay combined with trees, you can have a lot of problems and additional costs, because the ground will either tend to shrink and damage the foundations, or just as badly, it will heave and push the foundations around, cause cracking of the foundations and the wall. So to counter that, you either have to do something like put in very deep foundations with compressible material around them to resist the movement, or other foundations you might even get into piling and so on. So do take advice at an early stage before you commit to any site, because it can be very expensive. It's quite possible you could spend £20,000 or £30,000 extra on a site with no real appreciable improvement in the value of the house, other than the fact you won't get cracks at some time during its life. So take care with that one. Consult an engineer, get a digger to dig some holes and have a look at the ground and find out what it is. The other one to consider is that if it's in an urban situation, or maybe elsewhere, if it was an old petrol station or a factory or something, it may well be that the ground is contaminated. You'll be asked to do a contamination survey, and it can cost, again, a huge amount of money to remediate that site. And maybe the site's worth it, but you need to know what the costs are and factor that into your bid when you go to the before you commit.
And I guess linked to that might be a site that's perhaps not appreciably sloping to the eye, but actually when you've come to have do a site survey, there really is quite a slope going on, or it might be very evident because it's a splendid view and it's on the side of a hill. But how is that going to impact your cost?
Well, it's certainly going to affect the whole sort of geometry of the architecture of the house. If you've got a significant slope, you're probably going to end up cutting into the embankment, the slope of the site, putting in retaining walls and so on. Again, these are going to be very expensive to do. Removing soil and taking it off site these days because of landfill tax is enormously expensive. So you need to think carefully about how you position the height. Can you somehow balance out the position of the house with cut and fill, or do you have just to take off a load of soil off the site and build expensive retaining walls, which themselves may have issues in the future if you get damp and so on. So I'm painting a bit of a gloomy picture here, but all I'm saying is that it can be quite expensive. So unless you've got a real peach of a site with a fantastic view or something like that, my advice would be to go find somewhere nice and flat. It would be a lot easier, all from start to finish. And that would be my overall advice. I only built on a handful of sloping sites in my life building houses, and they didn't end up well, really. We ended up having to do all sorts of things to get around problems.
And obviously these specialist foundations themselves can be costing many tens of thousands, as we've touched on before. The cost of site surveys themselves and all of those.
You can have engineers involved in foundation design and retaining wall design. You can have extra drainage so the site doesn't, you don't get water cascading down the hill and damaging the building and leaking into the basements. So there's a whole bag of things to consider.
Okay. We've touched on trees already, but perhaps you could just expand for us, excuse the pun, a little bit on why trees are such a problem.
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, the problem is that particularly in clay soil, you get shrinking of the clay or heave of the clay, which moves the foundations around. If that happens, it can actually damage and crack the building itself. That's very expensive to put right, if indeed it's actually possible. So yeah, avoid shrinkable clay ground and trees. And the other thing we mentioned the other day when we were preparing for this conversation was tree protection orders. If you've got a tree or some trees, attractive trees on the site, you may not be able to cut them down to get your access or the building in, because they will be protected by planning constraints.
Okay. So we haven't got too much longer left now. So connection to services. So again, we touched on this in terms of your site location, but why in a bit more detail can this build up, cost-wise?
Well, clearly, if you're in an urban area, the chances are that you'll have all the main services readily available, but it's still worth getting a price from your local provider, because it may be that they are on the limit of the cable supply into that area, for argument's sake. So they may have to strengthen the main or something. So I'm not an expert at it, but I know very often they pop up with all sorts of reasons why they're going to charge you a lot of extra money. So get a quote for every service that's coming into the site before you commit, and also ask them for details of any services that are near or crossing the site, because they can be very expensive to move if they decide that you can't build over them or adjacent to them. I can remember one job where we had just a very innocuous pair of telegraph poles and some cables going across it, and the local electricity company wanted £30,000 to remove it. The sites themselves, it was a pair of sites, were only worth, I think they were asking £100,000 for the site, and in the end they had to drop it by the cost of those cables. So it was certainly worthwhile asking the question. So yeah, check on these things. Obviously, make sure you can get onto the main drains for sewage. You may have to put a pump in there if the slope of the ground is against you. So again, it's all costs. You could probably blow a big hole in £5,000 or £10,000 putting a sewage pumping plant or a treatment plant. And again, no tangible value at the end of the day, just money that you've got to pour down a hole.
Okay, but so as long as you know about these things in the first place, you might be able to mitigate, I think, is what you're saying, by negotiations with the seller of the plot, because any other future acquirer is going to have exactly the same problems.
Exactly. Find out before the problem starts, and you can make a reasoned decision when you're not under pressure. If you've bought the site and you've got all these problems piling in, you're basically stuffed, really. You've got to take it on the chin, and it may well be that your project is actually unviable. You'll end up paying more for it than if you just walked into a new home built by somebody else.
Okay,
which is the opposite of the exercise.
Indeed. Also, linked to site acquisition then, so there's a lot of fees there. I'm just starting to wrap up because I know we haven't got too long today. So we are obviously talking solicitors' fees, land registry fees for all the checks that they do, all the local searches, and obviously stamp duty. Seek advice yourself in terms of stamp duty and where it stands, because obviously it's changing all of the time at the moment. So yeah, do go and have a look on .gov website and look for the latest. But they all add up really significantly, and particularly stamp duty can make your projects cost prohibitive.
Yes. Get up-to-date prices for them. As you say, stamp duty is bobbing up and down at the moment. It may be that you're under the threshold at the moment. Get a quote for your legal fees. Again, the lawyers are having a bit of a party with COVID at the moment. They're so busy, and legal fees are going up significantly.
Okay, so that is connected then to finance fees, and I know you have some thoughts on that. Obviously, the longer a project goes on, the more expensive your finance and funding is.
Yeah, I mean, you can bet your boots that one way or another the project will take longer from start to finish. Now, it may be that the planning situation takes longer, which drives you into the winter, which means the building project takes longer. So it's by no means unusual for a project to overrun by 3 to 6 months. So calculate the additional cost of that. If the best happens and you come in on target, I'm sure your wife or your partner will find something else to spend the money on in the kitchen or something.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking mortgage arrangement. Sorry, I can't talk. Mortgage arrangement fees, land valuation, re-inspection. As you can see, early redemption fees, the penalties, and of course interest there. So make sure that you mitigate by planning for it further out.
Just do your homework on all of these topics, because they can all add up probably to 50 or 100,000 pounds, depending on the scale of the project.
Okay, so just a quick recap then. So we've touched on a lot of topics here today, and there's absolutely loads that we could talk about. But just to recap, as I say, design costs, site appraisal, make sure you get that. That sounds essential from everything that Adrian's been talking about today. Make sure that you know what you're in for as you acquire the site. Forewarned is forearmed, I think in this case, and know your finance fees. So that's everything today from us with our hidden costs whistle stop tour. There is a full article on this on the Cost Myself Build website. So thanks for listening. In a moment, Adrian is going to be taking some questions with the Q&A session. So please continue to post any questions that you've got, and he'll be responding shortly. So on that note, Adrian, I'm going to thank you for your time today. I think that's us over with our presentation. So I will sign off. Thanks a lot, Adrian. Goodbye.